On the part of the German elites, on the part of the leaders, what motivates this extremely perverse attempt to lower the standard of living of their own people, or peoples? What's driving it? What's behind it?
You know, I wouldn't say it's unique to Germany. I mean, they've perhaps been, you know, more explicit about it than some of the others. But look, you've got attacks on the welfare state going on across the globe. I mean, it's been, the New Deal is being eviscerated in the U.S. There is a long-standing attack on the European social welfare state. The Asians were subjected to this in the late 1990s in the Asian financial crisis. So, to me, it's the logical endgame of the Washington consensus. I don't think there's anything particularly sinister about it. I mean, it's very sinister, but I don't think it's uniquely German. I mean, I know that they talk about Weimar hyperinflation, but the reality also is that if you look at the German history closely, during the Weimar period, the Nazi Party only gained, they had about 5 or 6% in the polls, and it wasn't actually until Brüning introduced the austerity in 1931-32 that their poll numbers went up to about 30-35%. So if that is indeed one of the things that's motivating them, it's based on a profound misreading of history. And I think that most of them know that. I mean, people like Jens Weidmann know that, but they play on this prevailing popular prejudices within the German mind. But I'm not going to single out the Germans and say that they're uniquely evil in this regard. So
I take entirely what Marshall has been saying for granted. I agree with him entirely. But there is an angle that I want to add to this. When in 2008 Wall Street collapsed, the Europeans initially were very smug about, you know, the Anglo-Saxons getting their comeuppance until they looked inside the books of their own banks and they realized that their own banks were far more leveraged and in a far worse state than the Wall Street and City of London banks were. Very quickly, the German taxpayer was asked to provide their banks, with the creation of the bad banks and so on, a very large amount of money, a whole mountain of money. But within a year, by the end of 2009, it was clear that another mountain had to be provided. The German leadership was not eager to go back to the Bundestag and ask for another mountain of money because of the exposure of the German banks, in particular to the Greek debt, to the Portuguese debt, to the Spanish debt, to the Italian debt. So the story that was sold to the German electorate was, out of solidarity towards our partners in Europe, in the periphery, in the Mediterranean, in Ireland, and so on, we are going to give them a lot of money in their hour of need. Right? Remember that the German working class was being squeezed all those years while the living standards in the periphery were increasing. And to justify to the German hard-working, squeezed laborers why that was happening, austerity became effectively a kind of psychological mechanism for saying, okay, you have been squeezed for all those years, they were having a better time in terms of overall growth rates, now we're going to give them money in order to pay their debts, but we're going to make them bleed. So austerity has no economic rationale, they understand it, that it's not going to work, but it was the strategy by which the German elite managed to shift banking losses from the books of the German banks onto the German taxpayer via the Greek state, via the Irish state, via the Italian state.
I'd like to add one element, because the psychology is very important in what you say, and I would like to go back from the side of the Troika. There is something that strikes me. I'm by all means not an expert on the Greek economy, but it seems to me that some things have been said about the people who don't pay taxes, the corporations who don't pay taxes. And what do? We take money from the retirees. It's so easy. It is so cheap. It's a cheap shot. The people who take the decisions take the money from the poorest and keep the rich and the corporates and the army and the church in that situation. And that is what bothers me. Because if the Troika was doing a job that really restores something like a tax equity or an equitable share of the burden, I think it would be socially acceptable.
I am not an economist. I'm an ancient Greek historian. And it's because of my love and involvement with Greece that I have become, over the last few years, absolutely and completely obsessed with this unreal, surreal situation that I see unraveling. Massive effort is being made to prevent any of these issues from surfacing and from any public awareness, even among highly skilled and intelligent, academically educated people, to disseminate in any way, shape, or form. And I think it is my absolute astonishment at the lack of concern while, Greece sunk desperately into this situation, and the type of explanations that we've been hearing all along for what is happening to Greece. And I think that's really what my question is, really, and it's kind of a blend of a question and a statement, because it stems from my utter and complete astonishment at the existential nature now of this crisis that is destroying the European world, city by city, town by town, destroying the lives of people who were previously able to sustain themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think there has been some coverage, but I think part of the narrative, of course, is that it's to blame the victim, I mean, you don't hear about suffering Greeks. You hear about Greek tax cheats or public profligates in Italy, or corrupt these corrupt criminals in these mafiosi in Italy. I mean, that's really the extent of it. You don't hear about, say, the kind of criminality that goes on within the banks that created this mess in the first place. So that's part of it, and then part of it after a while is just if you try to reduce it to the nature of statistics, it's a form of cognitive dissonance. If you read Hannah Arendt's book Eichmann in Jerusalem, I don't want to get into the Nazi metaphors too much, but I mean, the way she describes Eichmann, he's a bureaucrat. He just fills out his quotas. He just it's not you're not sending thousands of Jews to their deaths in concentration camps. You're filling a quota, and when you think about it in those terms, it anesthetizes it. Yeah, it becomes a number. So that's what's happening.
I feel the need to step in here. It's what happens when vested interest employs oversimplification to exploit prejudice. In Greece, I've been involved, as you may know, or not, in the public debate now for 3 years. And it is my personal experience that journalists, especially financial journalists, are suffering a personal dichotomy and a personal tragedy. When they speak to me, when the microphones are switched off and the cameras are absent, we almost agree. And then you read their piece in the newspaper or hear their editorial on the television, and you think, my God, is this the same person? And then they meet you in a bar or in a restaurant, they apologize because their job depended on writing that. Outside Greece, look, it's very simple. Either Europe would have to accept that there is no such thing as a Greek crisis, that there is a systemic Eurozone crisis where Greece is the symptom, or it will have to blame it on the Greeks. It's either or. The European elites were not ready and are still not ready to accept that this is a systemic crisis. So it is quite natural to play on the prejudices of the northerners about the southerners, to invoke the metaphor or the allegory, the Aesopian allegory of the grasshopper and the ant, to paint the Greek as the grasshopper and the German as the ant, in order to explain away, on the basis of a story which you can relate in 5 seconds, the crisis. When in reality, of course, what you have is a coalition of grasshoppers of the north and of the south, contriving solutions and crises that are at the expense of both the ants of the north and of the south. But that's a much harder story to tell in 10 seconds while the camera is recording.
I'd like to give you bit of hope. The three of us have become journalists. And I'm blogging in Le Monde in France and in Huffington Post. Many of the things that are happening, they are there black and white. We knew way before. And I have come to the conclusion that the question is not that we don't know. We do know. The facts are even public. The various 45 billion euros that Italy has to refinance every month, of course you have to do a lot of search, and it's in Italian, but if you really want, you'll find it. So I started being that journalist in 2008 because of the financial crisis. And I came back and I said, but we knew it all along. Greenspan, the great Alan Greenspan, made statements that today look totally irresponsible. Now, is it a hedge fund? So that might explain that. But the reality is that what you are raising is how you manipulate information for political reasons. And I have written columns in Le Monde that were in direct contradiction with what the official economic journalist was supposed to do. There is something going on where people who know and who have a voice and who start being recognized because of blogs and social networks and everything are starting to be there. And you know what's happening now is that when I come with something pretty controversial, I get quite a few phone calls from journalists who try to understand, because now that it's in the out, they can start talking about it, while before they were just asked not to pay too much attention to it. So hopefully there is another media democracy going on. It's only the beginning.